on in all the different artistic communities, so many different things to do. Hi, Bob, very nice to see you. So we are very blessed and honored and happy that you are here. Just as a reminder, so I see a couple of folks that they don't have their mute button turned on. Just make sure at the bottom of your screen you have that little red microphone icon. I would love to hear you, but just with so many voices, sometimes there's feedback, and we want to be very respectful to Gray, Jacobik, and Joan Seliger Sidney while they're reading tonight. I'm so excited to be hearing them read. This is another installment of our virtual readings. We've been doing a lot of these, and I guess we're kind of making these official. Yeah, so I'm very excited to have Joan and Gray read tonight. The way it's going to work, we're going to have Joan read first. Afterwards, Gray is going to read, and then there's going to be a Q&A. Joan Seliger Sidney is writer-in-residence at the University of Connecticut's Center for Judaic Studies and Contemporary Jewish Life. She is the author of The Way the Past Comes Back, Body of Diminishing Motion, Poems and a Memoir, that's the one by CavanKerry Press, Bereft and Blessed, plus many poems in literary journals and anthologies. Body of Diminishing Motion actually won the Eric Hoffer Legacy Finalist Award in 2005. Recently, the Connecticut Office of the Arts awarded Joan a fellowship to revise her picture books, poems, and creative nonfiction essays. Since fall 1996, she facilitates the Writing Your Life workshops for adults, and her favorite sports are things like nonstop lap swimming and adaptive skiing black diamonds. So without further ado, we have Joan Seliger Sidney.
It's so exciting to see so many familiar faces. I am going to start with the titled poem, Body of Diminishing Motion. And the one thing I need to say, Żerawna is the name of the town, the small town in Poland that my parents came from. It's now in the Ukraine, the borders keep changing. Body of diminishing motion. Even the saguaros, split by lightning or disease, die in thick armor. Even the cactus can't count on its red blooms. For 30 years, I denied the day might come when to walk across a room would be too far. Now shriveled, my leg muscles will not bear my body. A climber's legs, once they stretched across rock faults, hiked the hard way up a dike. I slid the rope through my fingers, repelled my body, rock to rock. Back and forth, I crawl across this room, synchronizing opposite leg and arm. I tried to train my nerve cells to reconnect as if there's method to disease. The voice inside guides, test of faith, don't hope, expect. Hope leaves room for doubt. Articles, stories, books. Every day I read how people heal themselves. In every cell, memory, every pain, every emotion imprinted and passed on. Grandparents I never knew, their bodies tossed into a pit for Żerawna's Jews. Last night in bed, my bowels erupted, spewing across my sheets and thighs. Was I my great aunt in Auschwitz, dysentery draining her skeletal body? So many voices through me trying to speak. Shekhinah, female face of God, free my body from their shadows. Let me tell their stories and mine. Another Holocaust poem, and the details came from my cousin in Santa Barbara, California. He was one of the two boys uh, in hiding during the Holocaust. The poem is called Malka at 90. In Yiddish, your name means queen. Too hard to go to the beauty parlor, you have let your crown go from gold to silver for the first time since 1945, when after 25 months, you emerged from hiding, until you and Uncle Munya emigrated and moved in across the street. My parents refused to speak Polish. You're Jews, not Poles, the government told them. I hated those rough, guttural sounds I couldn't understand. I wanted, like you, to belong to both worlds. Flatbush, where Coney Island and the Brooklyn Dodgers were a nickel subway ride away, and the shtetl, where Zissel played his violin in the street below your steps. How did you survive those 25 months in a cellar below the cellar of a house? 35 Jews in a space designed for 12. How did you breathe without a single inhalation of fresh air? Endure without a second of sunlight? What did you eat when the rats stole your stockpiled flour, barley, kasha? Late Sunday afternoons on East 2nd Street, you'd bribe me with your foxhead stoles to behave, letting me find them in your bedroom drawer. We'd pretend your evergreen bedspread was the forest where they stalked. After dinner, you'd pile my plate with rugelach and thumbprint cookies filled with strawberry jam, powdered sugar sprinkled on top. Today, I sit in your living room of 25 years on the 12th floor, Miami Beach. How many years since you touched your oven? These days, I bake your honey cake laced with whiskey and walnuts. Layla, your Jamaican caretaker, brews tea. Her name means night. She blares Days of Our Lives as we try to talk. Starish ni ruddish, at the elevator door you whisper, old age is no pleasure. And my cousin Stan, who gave me all the details for this poem, told me that he and his cousin Gus played with rats in the hiding place. The next two poems are about multiple sclerosis, a disease that I've had since 1965. And we all need role models. And Chris Rogers, for whom these poems were written, was my role model. While I was studying at UConn for my doctorate, one of my professors turned out to be her husband. And when I had another MS attack, I needed a neurologist, and I called Chris. Anyway, stamps. Each stamp, another country. Exotic flowers, ancient ruins, the Etruscan vase she found near the church in Gubbio, high above the market, flooded purple with fuchsias. A poster from Siena reminds her of the polio jeweled horses jerking backwards at the starting line, ignoring their frantic jockeys. The handsome Italian in skin-tight pants, urging her to bet on the race. Today, Chris and I trade stamps. She watches me display my duplicates on her dining room table. Afternoon light will allow her to see the stamps if her scooter is turned to the right angle. Her eyes follow my hands, opening her album to the correct page, pulling back the transparent cover, smoothing the stamps in place. Pages stretch between us like the patchwork quilt across her legs. I'm afraid of why I've come. On the table, her essay, Multiple Sclerosis and How to Cope. She asks how I feel, insists I look wonderful. My legs know the walk around the block as a sequence of stops, how I sit on any available lawn, pretending I'm waiting for a friend. Chris's body slumps lower in her motorized chair, hands too numb to make it go. Her hair is slightly grayer than mine. Her nurse hoists under each arm, twists Chris's torso side to side, fluffs her pillow. We talk of urgency, her voice a halting whisper, of training caretakers to rush the daily shower, not to let the movement from scooter to transfer bench to shower seat or the scrubbing become the morning instead of a Bach concerto or the Bible. Letters, books, stamps, birds of paradise blaze in the black Etruscan vase where Minerva, engraved in gold, rises. Naming. A fat chickadee outside my window flits from tree to tree, her buddy spitting sunflower seeds into the snow. Make me think of your last visit, Chris, 11 years back, how you sat in my dining room chair, intrigued by the birds on the makeshift feeder, a sheet of tin bolted to a rusting pole. With a field guide to birds, I became your teacher. You drive over, park in my garage, then drag your body up the 4 steps and drop into this chair. Multiple sclerosis. In those days, your hands turned the pages. You held your teacup, your fork. This morning, I chose the one you liked, the one I bought in Delft, its handle white with a blue windmill. These days, learning to name this fatigue, this off-balance hesitation, I am your student. Like you, I need to know every name. Lesion, exacerbation, remission, remyelinate. Then we're back to a Holocaust poem, and the epigram is by Cynthia Ozick. Forging Links, European Jewish Civilization, Language, Culture, Institutions was wiped out utterly. In the early morning silence, reading the drowned and the saved a vision of Primo Levi comes to me. His eyes clouded behind spectacles squint as he trudges each cobbled street, searching for traces of Turin's Jews. In and out of my dreams, I see their houses usurped by neighbors, the mezuzahs on the doors torn away, desecrated, though the shadows of the dead still visit the doorposts like kisses children feel on their foreheads long after they grow old. Late March, and it is snowing, though I know nothing will remain, that these fat flakes are no more than memories disappearing into trees, like my children who have left their swing set to me and the squirrels. Each time they return, I tell them another of my parents' Holocaust truths. In the town of burnt corpses, a peasant heats the ground to dig their graves. It was as if all of our corpses streamed to heaven in the full moon with its red ring, a way to link us to that other world we'll never know. And now we're back to one of my swimming poems. It's called Lapse. In this marriage of water and air, always she is the beginner, reaching her hands and arms to push away the water, to raise her head, to breathe. Though she swims her laps, butterflying up and back, trying to kick loose her leg muscles, the hamstrings spasm, then left foot crosses right, forces her to invent a one-legged way to swim. No more can she hoist her body out of the pool or climb the metal stairs. Instead, she sits in the hydraulic chair, waits for someone to flick the switch. Immobile in air, gravity reclaims her. In the locker room, there's always a woman to pull up her panties, stretch slacks, socks. After years of early bird swims, they know each other's bodies. Wrinkling skin, diminishing limbs, nothing holds them back. And my last poem, I've been very lucky to keep getting fellowships to the Artists Colony in Vermont, the Vermont Studio Center. And I wrote this poem during one of my residencies, Retreat. Oh, and my friend Brad Davis told me that the river, the Guion, which crosses through the Vermont Studio Center property, is also the name of the river that was in the Garden of Eden. Retreat. Outside, a snow-muffled boom. Lights flicker, disappear. Outside, snow swirls wilder. A crescent moon spins upside down. These sudden, unpredictable drifts propel us past the everyday complaints of lovers who don't quite meet expectations. Her laugh, too giggly or repressed, his conversation, too superficial or self-centered, his hand or hers, too cold. Disconnect the gut urges, return to where the Gian churns water into light. What would it be like to love the life we live? Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Joan. I gotta say, one of the most rewarding parts about this job is getting to first read an author's work, but then get to talk to them through email over the phone, and then finally you get to hear their work and their personality comes full circle. Joan, I appreciated your work. Thank you very much. In the group chat, I don't think I made this clear. There's a section on your Zoom called chat, and in chat, what we've been doing for readings, anytime you hear a very beautiful line or you feel like you're going to forget a question, you could write it down in the chat and even show some love. Ted D, thank you. You said loved it. Peggy said beautiful, Joan, especially like the swimming pool. Yes, I do like the swimming pool poems as well. So please in the chat, leave any comments, leave your questions, and then when it's time for the Q&A, we can engage with the chat. Just with the chat, there's 63 people on this Zoom call. So it would be insane if everyone was trying to get on the Q&A at the same time. But it's amazing that we have 63 people here, and I'm so happy for it. I will stop talking. Let me give Gray her introduction, and then Gray, the floor will be yours. So Gray Jacobik is a widely anthologized poet and the author of several notable collections. The Double Task was selected by James Tate for the Juniper Prize. The Surface of Last Shattering received the X.J. Kennedy Prize. Brave Disguises, the AWP Poetry Series Award. And in 2016, The Banquet, New and Selected Poems, received the William Meredith Award in Poetry. She's been awarded the Yates Prize, the Emily Dickinson Award, and the Third Coast Poetry Prize. Jacobik is a painter, an excellent painter, as well as a poet, and several of the CKP covers has featured our artwork. Without further ado, I will be introducing you to Gray Jacobik. Let me unmute you, Gray. All right, so Gray, unmute yourself. Perfect.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful, even though you're all postage size or smaller, to see so many wonderful people, Jean, Jessica, Anne, I mean, Charlie, students I haven't seen in 20 years. It's so wonderful that you're here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And Joan, that was just stunning. It brought back the memory of all of those poems, and thank you. Thanks for the gift of that. And thank you for inviting me to share this event with you. And I just have to thank my wonderful, extraordinary press. Robert Cording is there somewhere, and he introduced my work to CavanKerry. And it's been delightful for me. And I see Jonathan and Joan Handler and Gabriel and the rest of the press. Thank you all so much for everything you've done to bring this beautiful book out and to support me in getting it out into the world. I honor you. Thank you. So Eleanor is, it's 57 dramatic monologues that I wrote over a period of 17 years in the imagined voice of Eleanor Roosevelt. For the most, they're in verse, blank verse for the most part, but other meters as well. And I deal with several themes. One is her relationship to servants throughout her lifetime, because that brings up her evolution in terms of class issues and racial inequality. So her consciousness, as it evolved into the great humanitarian that she became. Part of the poems are about her education at the end of the 19th century, and then her marriage, her children, her relationship with lovers, 3 particular lovers I bring into the book, and well, as well as her life as the First Lady. She was the First Lady of the state of New York, beginning 1928, and then at the White House from 1933 till 1945. So, and then there's a section at the end of the book that deals with her remarkable career at the United Nations and her work in bringing and creating and bringing forth the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is still the most astonishing document I've ever read. And if I recommend everyone read it, it's so moving, it's so profound, and it's the perfect thing to read in the middle of this pandemic. So I'm going to begin with the first poem, which introduces her, read a few from various years in the middle, and then conclude with the last poem in the book, just to give you a flavor of this incomprehensible, grand, astonishing life. I was born Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, called Eleanor after my father, Eliot. My daughter is Anna Eleanor, called Anna. Her daughter, my granddaughter, bears our name as well, only we call her Sisti. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt is the name I bore until I married Franklin and added a second field of roses from the Dutch to my name. Soon I will be named only Anna Eleanor Roosevelt Roosevelt. Anna, after my mother, who died at 21. Eleanor, after my father, who died at 34. Field of roses, field of roses. A name to be carved in stone, yet a vision if you will see it. One field of roses followed by another. This poem is set in 1909. She has been married to Franklin for 4 years at this point. It's number 14. Our third child was born in my 4th year of marriage. Born in 3 hours, but with no less pain than Anna or James. A perfect flower of a child, 11 pounds. He would bear his father's name. 6 months later, we christened him in St. James's Episcopal Church, where Franklin and Franklin's father were christened, where on Franklin's side, all Roosevelts dedicated their own to Christ. Weeks later, at 7 months and 14 days, we buried baby Franklin in the graveyard at St. James's. Rosie and Sean McGuire slowly lowered that tiny brass coffin. Scrape, scratch, shovel to gravelly earth. Thud, thunk as earth hit brass. Surely, I thought, I would fade away. Scrape, scratch, thud, thunk. I stopped eating as baby had, the rack of guilt, the rack of grief. My baby had cried and gasped and coughed, faint broken coughs through those last dreadful nights and days. His pulse raced, slowed, raced, slowed, stopped, an infection of the heart. A soul had passed through me I never knew, for I'd handed him off as I so often had, to a servant or his nurse. From November to spring, I woke up wailing to whoever attended me. We must get baby out of the ground. He's alive. I know he is. He'll freeze if we don't get him out. Help me, please, please help me. All my life, I came back to St. James's and stood before my baby's small marker near a stone wall and a cypress tree. Mornings, an orange light would glow, reflected off the back of the church, then beyond the dark Hudson and the first bluish purple ridges of the Catskills. The terror of being buried alive never left me. 50 years later, so I wouldn't wake in the cold, dark, bitter dark, as I was sure baby had, I begged my doctor, David Garovich, to have my carotid artery severed after the coroner certified death. And David promised he would. Number 41, this poem is set in the summer of 1932. The Democratic National Convention has just been held in Chicago. And never before had the party's nominee appeared at the convention. This was the first time such a thing had ever happened. As we were leaving Albany to fly to Chicago, so Franklin might accept his party's nomination on the convention's floor, an unprecedented act. He told me he had cut a deal with William Randolph Hearst, that broker of elections, agreeing to abandon the World Court and the League of Nations for his editorial support. My husband sacrificed his principles for power, for both of us believed and had worked ardently for many years on this issue, that the court and the League were our best hopes for preventing another world war. And for several years after that, when many were crying out for legislation that would make the barbaric lynching of our Negro brothers a federal crime, Franklin refused repeatedly his support, letting one bill after another die an ignominious death. His refusal on this and on other worthy proposals, because he would not stand up to the Dixiecrats, because he enjoyed calling himself a practical politician, was cowardice. My heart ached over these actions and non-actions of his. I'd do what I could to persuade him otherwise. Then I would close my eyes and pray, and with all my might would will him to act otherwise. Sometimes then I'd feel gratitude to Miss Mercer, for his affair broke the spell of my enthrallment to Franklin, sustained in the early years of our marriage. Without this inadvertent gift of his cupidity, I could not have endured. I was free. Thus his high-handedness, callousness, ignominy, when they shone forth, never imperiled my soul. So that makes mention of Lucy Mercer, who was Eleanor's social secretary in Washington in the during World War I, and Franklin had a love affair with her. She shows up several times in the book at various places. This takes place in 1939, number 44. I was in California and could not attend Marian Anderson's Freedom Concert, performed at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial, although I heard her, of course, on the radio. 75,000 Americans, the first fully integrated audience of that size. Oh, I wish I had been just another anonymous citizen standing in the sunshine that day, listening to the contralto Toscanini called the voice of a century. Miss Anderson sang arias and spirituals. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen, and America the beautiful. Harold Ickes spoke first and declared, "In this great auditorium under the sky, all of us are free." Miss Anderson had sung in the White House 3 years earlier, and I had the devil to pay then. And that February, when I'd resigned my membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution in protest because they forbade performances by Negro artists in their Constitution Hall, I had the devil to pay again. Miss Anderson said she was shocked beyond words to be barred from the capital of my own country after having performed in nearly every major capital of the world. Franklin exclaimed that as far as he was concerned, she can sing from the top of the Washington Monument if she wants to. How deeply sad and troubling some of the hate mongers in our own society are. That rabid Catholic priest from Detroit, Father Coughlin, for example, spewing the most vile and ghastly anti-Semitism. We were giving comfort to Hitler, Franco, and Mussolini through our enduring racial injustice, our anti-immigrant and isolationist policies. A month before Miss Anderson sang before the statue of the great emancipator, Hitler invaded Prague and took over Czechoslovakia. My husband had just recognized Franco's Spain. I yearned for the entire idea of war to be obsolete, but now there was renewed bloodshed everywhere. Japan had attacked China. All free people of Europe, those of the Jewish faith in particular, were in peril, or soon would be. And here we were, with nearly 200 separate legislative bills introduced in Congress, any one of which, if enacted, would have made it a federal crime to hunt down and murder by lynching a fellow citizen, each bill thwarted or withdrawn. And then this pettiness from the DAR. It defies imagination. So it's sort of some things have been changed. There's always been this thread in American history. This is April 1945. Slowly along the 800 miles of track from Warm Springs to Washington, we carried Franklin's body home. I alone in a Pullman, exhausted, yet keyed up thinking of all I had to do in the next days. And there, through a day and night and into the next, at every small crossroads or town, along the streets of cities or in clusters at the edge of fields, people waited beside the tracks to pay tribute to Franklin. Men took off hats, held them to their chests, bowed their heads. Boys stood with arms around the shoulders of sweetheart or sister, the women weeping, the men weeping. Once I glimpsed 4 Negroes in a cotton field fall to their knees in prayer. Rock of Ages or Abide With Me floated through the windows. Church choirs waiting trackside, their voices swelling when they saw my face. Their children wrapped in blankets, parents held them high, so one day they might remember the train that carried Franklin home. I wept such a tide of sorrow. At nightfall, we darkened the cars, lit only the last, the president's, so his catafalque, draped in our flag, could be seen for miles. I moved outside of myself then and entered the pageant of the public mourner. Caught up in this tempest of grief, lost, bleak, vague in myself, I felt surprised nonetheless by this great outpouring. I knew the man in his weaknesses and shortcomings, his failings as a father, husband, friend. He had betrayed me yet again, as I learned within minutes of arriving at Warm Springs, for his cousin, Laura Delano, told me Lucy Mercer Rutherford was with him when his cerebral hemorrhage struck. She had dined at the White House several times that year, their meetings arranged and covered by our daughter. Franklin had promised me, on condition I not divorce him, he would never see her again. That last spring, with Franklin's circle of intimates shrunken, this loneliest of men reached out to me once more for companionship. I declined his request. My awful failing is not forgetting a hurt, rarely forgiving one. That night we carried Franklin's body back to Washington. I drew back the window curtain of my berth and until dawn watched those lining the tracks. Their bodies, the very body of the nation, seemed to pass through my recumbent form. Then I took in the scope of what Franklin and I had begun in those Groton woods beside the Nashua River when we pledged ourselves to one another 42 years before. Ours was the sweet and idealized love of youth, immersed in the illusions no one in our lives dispelled us of. I was 19, he 21, still at Harvard. Oh, I took back from him years ago my vulnerability, sealed myself like a housewife seals her preserves with paraffin. He had his second wife, Missy Lahan, whose company I never begrudged him. I had my loves, Earl, Lorena, my life apart from his. There were 5 children to live for, appearances to maintain, our country, the Depression, war, the world's future. What had become of that immense passion? Surely it was here, in those men and women weeping as if a saint had died instead of a brittle, irascible, complicated man, a man ruled by desires and whims, a need for subterfuge, flattery, a man of such particular thoughtlessness in certain regards, he could stun me to disbelief, and yet a lonely man, desperate for companionship, who flirted because he could not bear solitude. All the while, he had the people, how beautiful their hands, their faces, the reverence and dignity of their bearing, as was not true with me, yet so with them, and all the things that were of real permanent importance. He never let them down. In the years to come, spoken in the thousands of varied accents we Americans have, causing my throat to clutch, my tears to rise, hundreds upon hundreds would say to me, Mrs. Roosevelt, I loved your husband. I mourned Franklin genuinely, and with all the complex, contrary, and varied emotions that marked our 40 years of marriage. I did not weep. Our wedding day was St. Patrick's Day, 1905, when Uncle Teddy, then president, stepped away from the parade he was leading through the streets of New York and stole all the attention. Our marriage's last day in 1945 fell 3 days short of the 80th anniversary of Lincoln's death. Franklin died in the little White House in Georgia, not the White House. And there beside him, Lucy Mercer Rutherford, not me. What a glorious and tragical and ironical life our marriage gave me, joined by Holy Sacrament, by our children's lives, our baby's death, through Franklin's paralysis and his political triumphs, but mostly by our common dream of better, happier, more just lives for all people of goodwill. Ours was a marriage accommodated in private, performed in public, yet we admired and respected one another. although oftentimes begrudgingly. I'm going to stop there. Thank you. Thank you.
So I see a bunch of people snapping and clapping. Thank you so much. Gray, I do suggest you look at the group chat box. So many people are saying so many wonderful things. Tonight, both of your works were just so powerful and so just filled with imagery and telling in that imagery, telling us about your researches and your experiences. So I actually, I wanted to start, I wanted to start the Q&A while I was ruminating about both of you, and that you both published collections entrenched in experience, whether that was studied experience or lived experience. What was it like, or what is it like to read from work that you experienced over several decades?
Begin, Joan?
You know, it's
Oh.
been quite a while since I went back to Body of Diminishing Motion. And I'm one of the questions Gabriel passed on to me, that people were wondering how I could write about such intimate details like that experience of diarrhea, you know,
Right.
and it actually, you know, writing is healing. And it took me a very long time. I was in denial when, after 10 years of not knowing that I had multiple sclerosis, for 10 years I was in remission, and until I got to know Chris Rogers, I, you know, didn't know what multiple sclerosis was. And it
Wow.
took me a very long time till I never even told my father before he died. My parents thought that it's heartbreaking, but I found out after my father died that my mother thought I didn't love them because I wouldn't go for walks with them.
Oh my
I didn't
gosh.
want them to see that my legs would turn to jello. Anyway, so when I did my MFA in writing, 1987 to 89, that was when I was encouraged by Linda Hull to start writing about MS. And it just opened up all those doors and became a healing experience.
Wow. And I'm so glad you did, Joan. And I can say it for everyone here. We were honored to hear your words today. So many good things that came out of these words. Jonathan mentioned that just one line after another was just beauty. And in the subliminal messages of these pains, there are these beauties. And there are these objective, I'm sorry, my cat just jumped on my laptop. There are these objects of which we still need to speak. So thank you for that. Thank you so much, Joan. I appreciate you as a writer and as a person. Gray, your thoughts? You were writing about Eleanor for such a long time.
Well, I put it aside for long periods of time and took it back up and basically because I was giving readings from time to time and people wouldn't let me forget it. You know, they would hound me because they'd heard me read some of the poems and wanted to know when there'd be a book, and then I'd have to go back and write some more. And I realized more and more how, not only because of the particular episodes of her life that I chose to inhabit and embody, how much of my own emotional life is shaping my writing. I mean, I would always think and always say that, you know, this was about Eleanor Roosevelt, and of course it is all about her. It's her history, her facts. but certainly their emotional truths that come
Mhm.
out in the poems resonate with my own intimate experience. I don't think I could write about it otherwise if that weren't the case.
Right.
So as I live with the poems now and look at them, and particularly I recently recorded the whole book, and in that process I realized there was more of me in the poems than I'd thought.
Right.
So,
I mean,
so
and that happens, right? That's why when we go to our local bookstore, support your indie bookstores, everyone. We're going to see poetry in those fiction sections, right? We were in a conference call with Bob Cording on another reading another week, and we talked about that at the end of the day. Even if we have these true moments in our poetry, they are works of fiction, and we're always balancing between these ideas of fiction and fact, and whether we're doing something like researching for a book such as Eleanor, or researching things about Eleanor, or even researching our own medical conditions, I don't think readers know how much research we actually put into our materials. So do you think both of you can talk about what the research is like for taking on projects such as your books or any other collections you published before?
I was really fortunate that I had a fellowship to work for a year to commute to Yale
Mm,
to the video archive for Holocaust testimonies. And it gave me the opportunity to watch during the day 2 long videos each visit, and to begin writing a little bit from other people's stories.
mm, mm.
And but I have to say that the bulk of the stories came from my mom telling her when I was growing up, she didn't talk about anything except their wonderful honeymoonish escape, on the President Harrison, uh, the ship from Bombay to Hoboken, New Jersey. And I always wanted to go on a cruise after that. Uh, but, and she was very upset, when the more questions I asked, she said, don't study the Holocaust. It's too terrible, too depressing. Um, but of course, I didn't listen. Children don't listen to their parents.
Mm,
And it's still a subject that's very, very compelling. And the horror is that we look around the world and we see that nobody's learned, that everyone is killing everyone else, that if if the virus didn't hit all of us,
mm.
there were still the refugee camps where children and mothers were dying, starving. Um, so when will we ever learn?
Right. Yeah, that is so powerful, especially because there's conversations that were happening in the chat about, and Gray mentioned this too, not much changing in terms of politics over the span of however many years. And there's always something going on in the world that is relative throughout the ages. So, Gray, would you be able to expand upon that a little bit in terms of how the politics usually stay the same, or how that kind of made you think about your research differently, perhaps, or gave you a different perspective once you were going through Eleanor?
well, particularly the period of the 1930s, and as events were beginning to happen, and we were aware. I mean, few wanted to be aware. There was so much isolationism, and it's really hard for us to imagine the kind of anti-Semitism that was rampant. And that's what kept us out of the war as long as it did, was
Mm,
not wanting to alienate Christian voters who were anti-Semitic. And also at that time in the 1930s, and this is a fact few people realize, more than a third of American voters were of German extraction. Our citizens were largely of German extraction at that point. And Roosevelt didn't want to offend them. He wanted their vote. And so didn't want to go to war with Germany. And so there were some awful, awful politics. And, you know, the poem I read about Marian Anderson and the other that talks about the anti-lynching legislation, over 200 bills introduced, we still haven't made lynching a federal crime. It was passed by Congress, by the House of Representatives this March, but it's sitting on McConnell's desk, and so lynching is still not a federal crime. And so these things are very, very deep, and the you know, whether it's racism or anti-Semitism or isolationism or anti-refugee attacks, or, you know, it's I was really, that was illuminating for me to learn so much about the 1930s and all the deals that were cut and all of the ways in which people that, you know, politicians sold their souls. You know, the thing with Randolph Hearst, he controlled 300 newspapers.
Right.
And Roosevelt would never have been elected if he hadn't cut that deal with Hearst. And, you know, we could say, well, ultimately some good came from it, but yeah, but a lot was compromised too. And yeah, the research can go on forever. I mean, there's so much to research, and I wanted this to be about her subjective reality, her inner life. So much, I mean, you know, from some of the poems I read, it sounds like a lot of it is political, but a lot of it is personal too.
Right.
Poems about her children, her lovers, and her, you know, her finding her strength, and as the advocate that she became ultimately.
Definitely. And the thing is with poetry, the lines between personal and political can blend so much, just like it does in everyday language. Ladies, we can go on talking about stuff like this all night, but it is 9 o'clock and that is our time. There were so many comments in the group chat and questions that we weren't able to get you. I will say this performance is being recorded. Everything that didn't get put in the group chat, Gabriel Cleveland, our managing editor, did put a link to our YouTube channel in the chat box. Please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe so you can get notifications. This video will be going up. Once this video is up on the YouTube channel, you can type in your questions in the comment boxes down below, and then I myself will answer you, or I will reach out to Gray or Joan independently to get your questions answered. Without further ado, I want everyone to give Joan and Gray a resounding applause.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you for being here, Gray. Thank you for being here, Joan. It was so excellent to hear all of you reading. Everyone can start leaving, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually see if I could do this, because people have done it before. I'm going to try to see how I can unmute everybody as the host. Okay, so.
You did it.
Did I? No, I muted everyone. I want to unmute everyone so we can give a goodbye before everyone leaves. Mute all. So I'm going to mute everyone. And now I'm going to unmute all. I just muted everyone. You know what? I didn't practice this. I guess we're going to have to do that next time. But anyone who can't come off, you can come off and say goodbye. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you so much for coming.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you so much. Good night. Thank you.